Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to Junia Doan's The Spark. I'm Junia Doan. Thank you for joining us today. My guest is Gerhardt Knodel, internationally known artist. He is a man who has experienced much inspiration in his lifetime. Let's find out when he first experienced that spark. Well, I'm thrilled you're here, Gerhardt, and I'm so in awe of your career. I mean, you started as a fiber artist. You ran the fiber department at the Cranbrook Academy of Arts for 25 years, and then became its director for another 12. And now you've continued your artistic work as a retirement, what do I want to say, chapter of your life. Now
retirement is out. Forget that part.
I'm coming back to that. That's because I don't agree with that either, so that's really good. Yes, we will come back to that. But currently you have an installation exhibition at Saginaw Valley State University. How do you see that as a continuity of what you have been doing, and how might it be different just based on your time and thinking process at the moment?
Well, you may remember in the distant past my very strong commitment to exploring the textile medium in relation, especially in relation to architecture. For years, I was really interested in the spaces in which we live and the way in which the spaces are determined by an architect who oftentimes limits our ability to express ourselves in living architecture because of the decisions that are made, especially with regard to shaping space. So I did work along those lines for many years, which led to many commissions and so on. And as time went on, I became more and more interested in the relationship between the history of textiles, which is all about serving human need. And everybody's familiar with the close proximity that fabric has to their bodies and to the environment. And the expressive dimensions of art. How do those two kind of come together? And is it impossible for something that most people think of as being a decorative accoutrement to life to take a central role, to be an important resource for expression and for inspiration? And so after leaving Cranbrook and getting on with that next dimension of my life, which really happened because I just decided while my eyes are still sharp and my fingers are still working, get back to that studio, thinking that those moments that I have, or those months and years that I have with the work, is really most important to me. And so I arrived at the studio after leaving Cranbrook, and one day I said, well, where do I go from here? There is nothing more wonderful than freeing oneself from the past, but it's very difficult to do. It's not easy. It's easy to say, I think I'm going to be something else, to become something else. I'm going to see what is there that I don't know about, but it's another thing to do it. And so I stayed with that commitment. And along the way, I made some discoveries that the attitude that I had in my work was really running rather parallel to the whole notion of game playing. That is, a game is played with a sense of enjoyment and exchange, pardon me. It can be a socially very satisfying situation, but it also turns a corner at some point where it can begin to create a sense of tension in relationship with the person that you're playing the game with. In fact, as we know, the game of chess has led to warfare in many parts of the world in history. And I like that idea because I began to think then about the history of textiles, which are very much about satisfying oneself in an environment, with this whole notion where that positive side has an edge to it. It kind of turns into a little bit of a different direction. And what could that be? So that kind of fueled my engine for several years. And I did all kinds of work that involved a variety of new media. I was working with computers, did some projection work, interactive work, performative work, and all of that led me to a series of very nice big exhibitions and a publication. And 2 years ago, we're getting closer to our own moment in time, 2 years ago, after a lot of that was completed, I was standing in my studio and saying, okay, what next? Where do we go from here? I again felt the need to mine another territory. And what I discovered in cleaning my studio was a little bag that had some fragments of a Chinese textile. And it's a tapestry that is made out of silk, and it was in very poor condition. I don't even know where I got it. And I always take it out once a year, look at it, admire the parts that are still good, and then put it back into the plastic bag. This time I said, I'm not putting it back. I took it out, I put some heat bonding material onto the back of it, got out a pair of scissors, and cut out the pieces that were still good. And the next day I went back to the studio and looked at them. And something interesting happened, because I began to think about the fragments as fragments of language. Each one of them took on a character, and then I began, I'm not in love, I love Chinese art history. I love Chinese art, but I have never been close to it in my own work. And I thought, why don't I just treat these fragments as something that kind of was passed to me, like a little amulet or a little something that somebody gives to you on a special occasion. And why don't I let those be the root of something else? So in fact, I pasted some of those little pieces to drawing paper, made a little composition of them, and then with drawing materials began to expand on them. The interesting thing that happened to me was the moment I began to feel as though I was holding hands with the Chinese man or woman who had made that original textile. And at that moment, I linked back in my own history to the place where I fell in love with textiles in the first place. Because I always feel they are part of a continuity. That when I work in the medium, I am part of something that has a long, deep, and profound history. And to be in the 21st century, in this special moment of time, and be able to make that connection seemed really important. And that's the seeds of what I've been doing over the last 2 years.
Was that a first time for you to have that sense of contact?
That's specific. Yes, because it was so specific. And then the other part of this that I guess I haven't thought about before was that so much of Chinese art history is like a celebration of recognition of connection to the ancestor. In other words, historically, the Chinese never lived in isolation in their moment. They were always connected to their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents, deep in history, and their art shows that because they bring forward symbols of power that exist and that are used in the present time, but link them deep into history. And they don't have to say, I am a creative person, this is all totally new for me. It's the way you use history, the way you acknowledge your relationship to it, that creates a kind of platform that is the basis for real value in that work. And so that was a new thing for me. So as I began, I have to tell you this. So I'm looking at the drawing and I'm extending it with some of my own marks. And then I remember that I attended 2 years ago at the Detroit Institute of Art an exhibition of work by Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. And I remember that there are 2 examples there that come from Frida's work. She was with one of her close friends. They were in New York City. They were having a little dinner or whatever. And one of them folded a piece of paper in thirds and drew a head on it. And then she folded the head back and passed it to the other, who drew the body. And then they passed it back again to draw the legs. And then they opened it up to see what creature had been created. They call it an exquisite corpse. And what happened to them, it was a bonding agent that happened at that moment. Suddenly, the 2 of them that were both artists are creating something that none of them could have done without the other. And I think in my own work, that's something that has really developed. As I've continued the whole new body of work that I'm producing now, I really feel I am holding hands with others. In fact, I'm looking for relationships within the work itself that makes this feel like it belongs to that, and you can put them together. You know, like the history of painting, figure, ground, right?
Yes.
All right, so we have a figure, we have the background painting, and the history of painting, a good part of it has to do with exploring that figure-ground relationship. What happens when you separate the figure from the ground and allow it to exist out in the world, and the owner of the figure and the ground can make the relationships for themselves? So that brings another part of this into play, which is this goal of creating almost, what are they like, visual riddles in the work, where the audience sits and looks and says, I see fragments and I knew they once belonged together, but I don't see quite how they fit. Isn't that a moment of invitation created by the artwork that says, you help to fill this out. You create the legs in relationship to the body. You become involved in the creative process. And again, that's part of the history of textiles. Is a sweater if you don't put it on? If not, what is it? Do you need the body to complete the idea of the sweater? So I like that about art. In textiles, you have to put it on.
Well, that's a separate question. The first part I saw as a metaphor for life. You know, you have to weave disparate things maybe once together into a pattern that's yours, or anyway that you have put together. The second, is it a sweater if it's not worn? I think it's a different question. I'm not sure what it is. It might have to do with uses or application. I'm not sure on that one.
Well, I relate it to the experience of art.
Yes.
Because art doesn't exist. It isn't the object by itself. It's what you, the viewer, bring to the object, and art is created between your eyes and the object. It is in the space between. It is the field that is the field of interaction that is created. So every viewer recreates art and doesn't necessarily create it in the way that the artist had intended, much to the chagrin of some artists, you know.
I think you gave yourself a present of the wider world when you started to feel connected to somebody who is no longer physically here, and that what you're offering to people is they too can contact a wider world, have more sort of roots down, as it were, and therefore more variety, or anyway more sustenance in the here and now for whatever you do.
Well, you know, as you're well aware, there's a substantial distance between intentions and what the audience picks up in the work. And you know, at the opening of the show here, I was so excited about, this is the first time I've seen this work in a gallery, and it was just really terrific to have the opportunity to begin to explore it in that situation. but I'm thinking, half an hour before the opening, it's like being on Broadway. You say, what happens when the curtain opens? Is the audience really going to get what I'm after? But then on the other hand, I'm saying, wow, if I only had a chance to access what they do get from this, because maybe that's a dimension of the work that I don't even know about at this point.
How would you do that?
I'd have to kind of haul them off into a corner and have a
Can
little
you see
discussion.
it from their face?
Sometimes, but I just love it at an opening, and there's nothing more wonderful than the audience that takes a little time to go up and talk with the artist and say something of an invitation, like, I saw this strange area of blue over here. What did you mean in relationship to that? Or, I don't get this at all. What did you have in, something that just opens that dialogue. It's a very generous thing for the audience to do in relationship to the artist, and I don't think the audience should ever feel intimidated about that. Sometimes they feel as though they won't ask the right questions.
Yes.
But forget it. You've got to start someplace. And as your experience in asking questions grows, so does your understanding about art.
Talk a little bit about artistic intention, because I think there's a continuum between expression on the part of the artist and message on the part of the artist. And so that it's, I tend to not look for the message.
Yeah.
I look for the dialogue between me and the work. Am I feeling it viscerally? Has it taken me? So,
Yeah.
Which brings me to another question.
But
Go ahead.
I just want to say, but that, it's interesting to hear what you say about that, because I would counter that by saying, do you also find experiences where the information about the work opens up a way for you to react to it that you haven't thought about before?
Always.
I think that's really important. And not always do you get that for yourself. I have found it very helpful to have a little bit of an orientation, to look at the diversity of work that's going on in our world today. It's so difficult to go to group shows and even approach the diversity of modes of expression that exist there. It's really tough for audiences. But it's helpful if you can focus on something in particular and then begin to ask questions of it and maybe use it as a source of learning besides a place of inspiration. Because I believe certainly to be attracted to something is nothing to be suspicious about. That's to be celebrated.
Yes, and it's rare. So one of the things that interests me personally when I look about art, especially not of our times, is what is the culture of the time like? How true is that? Because we are an expression, all of us, of our times one way or another, or a revolt on our times. And sometimes in older work I can't get that, but where I can, I looked at. But I'd like to return to this comment about retirement and how you view this stage of your life against the word of retirement.
I have to tell you, I love my life.
Yes.
I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Right.
This is such a gift to be able to live through the range of experiences that I've had and still be excited about discovering things that I've never experienced. And so the only odd thing about it is the accumulation of experience. I love to be with young people. I love to be in, with students and so on. And then I sometimes walk away saying, oh my gosh, there's so much difference between the way they see the world and the way that I see the world. Is it possible that I have anything at all to say to them?
A lot.
And then in my next breath or my next thought that kind of reacts to that, I say, oh, come on, get off it. Of course you do. You have the experience of your life, and what else do we have to offer to one another anyway, right? I think...
How are you different from when you were at that age?
Oh, well, how am I different? I know a little bit more about some things, but quite honestly, The only real difference in my studio practice is that I'm very patient to be with myself and not rely on externals to arrive at decisions that I need to make. Earlier in my artistic career, I was under so much pressure because I did so many things. I had 18 graduate students. I was lecturing. I was doing this, making work for architecture, doing exhibition work, and so on. It was so multi-level, it was so complex that sometimes I felt I had to compromise. I think that's necessary. We all understand that. Now I have a different amount of time where I can really open up a possibility and then stay with it. And something that I haven't mentioned is that I no longer have any assistants. I'm working only alone. Everything you see in the current exhibition, I made. Every little shape I cut with a pair of scissors. I want to take complete authorship. I don't want to say it's my concept and, forget about who made it. In other words, bypass the physical and get excited about the conceptual, which is where a lot of art is today.
Yes.
Art seems to be the idea seems to be paramount to the physical object. And once you look at the object and read the text, you walk away with the idea, but not with the power of the subjective experience of the formal conditions that are generated within the artwork itself. And so I'm trying very hard to delve within that potential of living with the work in its development and discovering from it what it wants to be, rather than to will something on the work as I did years ago when time was limited and I said, I've got to know what I'm doing and I want to go in the work and create in the studio, create something important. What is it going to be? And I would design and and it's very different.
Talk a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm.
For me and for others to hear, how do you not will it but discover it or allow it to manifest?
Most of my good ideas happen in the shower in the first place. I'm a Pisces. I love, the water just flows. And after I'm delving into the challenge of coming up with something fresh, there are moments where you just decide, I'm going to try out this possibility. You begin by drawing, writing ideas, more drawing, maybe some little models, maybe some little studies, and so on. And it always comes to a point within 2 or 3 weeks that I say, it's not working. This is just a total disaster. I put it down, go away for a few hours, take the shower the next morning, and while I'm standing there with water running over my head, all of a sudden, blink, something happens. Or I go back to the studio and I look at something I've done with a little bit more distance on it, and somehow there's been something generated within the piece itself that talks back to me and says, this is worth pursuing. This is what is really interesting here. I don't know where it comes from. And I've talked with a lot of creative people about this issue. Where do good ideas originate? It's like a life that is well lived under the most wonderful conditions. I always say, some people, the stars were under perfect alignment when they were born. I don't know what it is that makes it possible to bring forward creative ideas that lead you into places that are quite different from areas that most people go. But I trust it. I trust it through work, not through just thinking about it. It's not like getting in a hammock and rocking back and forth in the summer sun. No, I've got to be in the studio. I've got to be working at it to find it.
Is it for you, do you feel it viscerally or intellectually when things that have been not quite right become right, or become right? Right isn't the right word.
No, but
precipitate into having a kaleidoscope stop in a way that has meaning.
Don't you know there's nothing better than when something works? I don't know how you of course you feel it in your whole body.
I feel it straight up.
You know, it's just a wonderful. One of my most recent pieces is a result of all the other things that came before it. In fact, work that's here in the show, but it's a piece that I don't have in this exhibition. And I finished it, and I looked at it, and I said, "Ah, this is good. This is where all of this was leading, you know." And I know it took all that rehearsal. It's like watching Fred Astaire, you know, on that film with Ginger Rogers. You know that he just didn't do it like that. He worked at it, and he worked at it, and worked at it, and you work at it until you find a moment of release. And that moment of release is where it happens because it had to happen. But you've got to give it the time, you've got to give it the patience, you've got to stay with it. You've got to work hard at it for that to happen. And I think if Fred Astaire was sitting here, he would agree.
Thank you so very much. It's really the is really the moment of awe, perhaps. So we've learned a lot from Gerhardt. One is art is inspiration. Also, like chess, it can be fun in a game, but then there's a little tension. And he likes to explore that edge of tension and through connectivity with the past. In this case, he was being a fiber artist, he's had a long tradition of reverence for what fiber is, shelter, touch, beauty, etc. And he had some old fragments that he cut up and started to use artistically. And he felt connected to the people who created those. And out of that, I think it widened his connections almost. Yes, I think so. And then he gave the Frida Kahlo and her friends, you draw part of it on a tri-paper. But really it's connected, and collegiality and work together can produce something big. On the creative process, he talked about that he has the idea in the shower. When it doesn't work out, he steps back, more shower, anyway, more reflection. He goes back and suddenly it becomes clear. Awe is important, the aha is important. You know it, you know what's right. Go out and live a life of complexity and creativity. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next time. Thank you, Gerhardt. That was so wonderful.
To contact Junia, send her an email at juniadonsthespark@gmail.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadonthespark.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on Junia Doan's The Spark.
Local productions on QTV are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.